Awesome. Joining me this evening for our study habits and writing assignments for freshman year. This is really wonderful for me to kind of get to review kind of all the study habits and everything I used as a student. I'm a recent grad. I just graduated in May of 2025. So it's been nice kind of reviewing over my notes and kind of what worked as a student and being able to share that with all of you. So I'll kind of go over what the academics look like at Christendom. For you enrolling as students at Christendom, obviously your vocation kind of for these next 4 years will be as a student. And so it's kind of looking at, okay, what are the practical strategies of how you're living out your vocation well and really getting the most out of your academics, from whether it's kind of the colleges, the best practices, kind of looking at those different classes, and kind of finding the best study habits to really succeed and thrive at Christendom. So kind of big picture, looking at like what's the point of the liberal arts and the point of classes at Christendom. It's really to become steeped in the truth. In all the classes that you're taking, the theology, the philosophy, literature and political science, all of it is fitting together in informing you as a person, and an understanding of the truth, not just as a set of facts or some practical skills that you can use out in the world, but knowing truth as a person. So whether that's through the theology classes or going to adoration and growing closer to our Lord, like your vocation is to become a saint ultimately, and the liberal arts and pursuing truth is all supposed to be geared towards that. So the academics at Christendom are really geared towards forming you as a person, not just intellectually, but obviously that is all going to kind of fit together. On the practical level, you really want to get better at clear communication, both written and orally. So there's a lot of things in the academics that are designed at Christendom to help you succeed in those areas. From the writing assignments to the oral presentations that you might have to give, from class participation, and the reading assignments that you're doing. All of this is geared towards forming you to know the truth better, but also to be able to articulate it to other people, and to be able to share that with others. You learn the value of argument and critical thinking. And so kind of the idea isn't necessarily that, oh, you just kind of read and ingest exactly what the professor tells you, but you really have to kind of question it and sit with it for yourself and kind of understand and engage in the course material. So there's a lot of different kind of pieces at play, but that's kind of the big picture goal and the mission in informing you, not just as students, but ultimately as saints, kind of on the way to heaven. So kind of looking at what that specifically looks like at Christendom in terms of the academics. The academic Christendom, so we do have a core curriculum. This means everybody is taking a lot of the same classes in their freshman and sophomore year to really get a strong foundation in the liberal arts. So again, this is about learning truth kind of in all the different subjects and facets. So from the theology courses, theology, literature, history, philosophy, you're going to be taking a language and as well as some math and sciences to really kind of fully form you in all those different areas. I was not much of a math person, but taking that math course, really strengthened my logic skills, that I was like, okay, I really do have to pursue the facts and make sure I know my stuff. So I do think those are super, super helpful, and they do really all build on each other. Christendom, in terms of our classes, we don't use the Socratic method. We use something called the scholastic method. So it's a little bit closer to kind of a lecture based, from the teachers, where you're really gaining from the professor's expertise, in that specific area, as well as just kind of you're taking notes and the readings that they're assigning. So you're really sitting at the feet of the experts, whether that's through the ancients that you're reading in the text and the primary source material, but also especially the professors who have learned and studied this and have decades of experience. So you're really getting a lot out of it from going to the classes. You'll also have homework, so most of this is going to be reading based for the majority of your classes. And again, like I said, with those primary and secondary texts, you're going to be engaging a lot in that material, in whether it's a history class where you're kind of learning what the mindset of that time period was, and really immersing yourself in the medieval time period, and how that changes in the Renaissance. So all those little details there, the homework is very much designed at enriching those class lectures and really helping you get the fuller context. You'll have assignments, so typically those are going to be writing assignments. Some courses like literature or history might have more writing assignments just because they tend to be very research heavy, and so you're gonna maybe have a couple more writing assignments, or they might be more often in those classes, but you are going to have some sort of assignment kind of in different classes. There will be readings, and there might be some shorter writing exercises, or maybe some sort of term project, and we'll kind of get into the weeds for some of those. And then lastly, you have exams. Now, I mean, most people don't like tests, but I do think, exams are really important for making sure that you have really kind of engaged in the material and you're able, again, to articulate it back. The point isn't necessarily that, oh, you just memorize a straight set of facts and that's all you can kind of do is regurgitate the material. To really be able to say it back in your own words, like that's the true test of learning. So a lot of the exams are going to be kind of a mix of maybe objective questions or short answer and essay. And those short answer and essay are really where you kind of get into saying it back in your own words to show that you really understand the material and that you can articulate it to somebody who maybe doesn't have a super strong background in philosophy or whatever it is. So kind of looking more specifically at the classes, getting the most out of your class time, obviously this is going to kind of be the first big chunk of homework in a way that you do. And I will say the first piece of advice is to actually do the reading. Sometimes your professors, it might feel like they're exciting a lot of reading, or you have a bunch of different classes that you're kind of juggling, and we'll get into some of the strategies for addressing that. But doing the reading really is going to be the best way for you to prepare for class. Again, like I said, to have that fuller context of kind of what's going on, and you'll just be able to connect, what the professor is saying with what you did in the reading, and it's really just kind of going to build that web of knowledge in whatever subject that you're studying. And then it's really cool when, between different classes, you're actually finding connections. When your medieval philosophy course and, your history course are really lining up, and you're like, oh my gosh, this Boethius makes so much more sense now. So there's so many beautiful things that can really happen, not just between the, reading assignments and homework that you're doing with class time and lectures, but even between some of those classes, that interdisciplinary understanding and knowledge is where things get really exciting. And the second thing I will say is go to class. This might sound obvious, but going to class is the number one study tip. Like that's the best thing you can do. I mean, it's ridiculous if you're skipping classes. I mean, obviously, if you're sick, you need to stay home and rest. But if you're skipping classes, you're missing out on so much knowledge from the professor. And honestly, going to class and taking notes is the easiest way. So those are kind of my next two things are to participate in class and to take notes. And so some classes, might have more room for discussion, or the professor really wants students to ask questions, or is going to be kind of leading a bit of a discussion. Maybe they'll have a seminar sprinkled here and there throughout the semester. So obviously those are kind of some important times to participate, but even just actively listening and making sure that you're engaged in the material. If the professor is quoting a specific passage, they say, hey, on page 47, there's this really important passage. Take out your book and actually look at that. And so you're really making those connections and taking notes from all of that. Like I said, the professors are kind of gold mines of information and knowledge. So you really want to be taking advantage of class time, of kind of underlining the things that they repeat. That's always super, super key. And having those notes to review so that when you get to the test, it's not like, well, I remember sitting, in lectures for an hour a couple times a week, but I don't remember anything that was said. Like, you really need to have those notes to kind of, jog your memory and make sure you're getting those connections and everything. And lastly is to review. So again, you kind of take those notes, but also reviewing after class, or sometimes maybe in the 10 minutes before the next class starts. You look from what you did on Tuesday for your Thursday class, and you're like, okay, I remember we were talking about the Peloponnesian War, and now what's going on with the Battle of Thermopylae, different things like that. So you can kind of see that broader context and make sure you're kind of fitting all the pieces together. So kind of the big picture, looking at time management, this is obviously important for making sure you're getting to your classes and, keeping up with homework for all your different assignments. You'll have a couple different classes. Most freshmen are going to be taking, about 15 or 16 credit hours. So that's about 5 classes. So you're juggling obviously different assignments, as well as kind of your social life and engagements and everything. So some of those kind of time management and study tips are finding where you focus best. You are going to have homework, and you're not going to want to spend 8 hours of every day doing homework and going to classes. You're going to want to hang out with your friends and go to lunch and, make sure you take time to go to mass, all those different things. There's so many amazing, clubs and extracurriculars going on campus. So you really got to make sure that you're, efficient with your time so that you're getting a lot out of your academics and, keeping up with your homework. But at the same time, you don't want to just be spending all day studying in your room. So finding when and where you study best is going to help in making sure that you can kind of fit in that homework time in the most efficient way, so that you're not just like slogging through it for 8 hours. You can kind of get through some of that material, so that you have time for more things. So for me, it was usually studying at the library. I found studying in my room was not good for my focus, unless I, just really needed like complete quiet, and I wanted to work from bed because maybe I was feeling under the weather. Other than that, I pretty much always studied in the library, just because I loved being surrounded by books, and that was just kind of where I felt most focused to kind of lock in. In terms of studying when, for me, it was I could really focus in the morning, and then in the evening, like late afternoon, right before dinner. And then after 11 p.m., my focus was gone. So I really couldn't study after 11 p.m. It was like, it's time to, go to bed, or hang out with friends. So kind of finding those times of when your brain is at its sharpest, and, when you're going to be able to understand those tough philosophy readings, is really important of kind of figuring that out. And that's something you can kind of start doing in your senior year of high school, in this current semester, of just kind of finding, okay, this is when I'm actually, I can completely focus for the next hour on this particular reading, or whatever it is. So kind of judging what's going to be best for you is kind of a little bit of a learning curve. Obviously, you need to plan ahead. This is something where maybe in high school you can kind of get away with, okay, you've got your assignments just kind of every day, and you're kind of going by the seat of your pants. But for college, you have a lot of different assignments to keep track of. And, you have a paper that you'll need to start more than 2 days in advance. So really making sure you have, all your due dates marked on calendar, whether it's, using a planner or a wall calendar or whiteboard, something like that, finding the thing that's actually you're going to see it every day, so that you can actually keep track of those assignments, and then breaking it down into smaller tasks. So maybe that's using a planner, maybe that's using to-do lists, maybe it's using a timer to kind of, make sure, okay, I'm going to work on this for 25 minutes and get through it as much of it as I can, and finding kind of which of those strategies works best, so that you can plan ahead, so that you're not just constantly burning the candle at both ends to try and, turn in an assignment on time at midnight. So we want to avoid that stress as much as possible, and just kind of looking at different tools to help. In terms of kind of helping with homework, I found audiobooks was super, super helpful for me. I was a literature major, so especially in my junior and senior year, I had a ton of reading, just because we were reading some really big novels, and I wanted to get through all the reading to make sure I could, understand what was going on in class lecture, and just because they were such amazing books. And so for me, it was, okay, audiobooks that, I can take a walk if I need a study break, or my eyes are just too tired to read right now. So finding those different tools that kind of work best, again, that are going to help you understand and study the best, while still helping you keep your focus, so that it's efficient but also effective. So those are kind of some of the main time management tips. Looking specifically at kind of papers and assignments, in your freshman year, in your first semester, you'll have about 3 papers. So typically 2 for literature, 1 for history, and then you'll also have some shorter writing assignments. Now, depending on the professor, those might be every couple of weeks. I know a couple professors who would do a writing assignment every week, but it would be less than a page. So it would be super, super short, and you wouldn't have to do any extra research for it. So typically, the more often you have writing assignments, the shorter or less intense that they'll be. And they'll kind of gradually increase from your freshman year. So your freshman year, you're kind of looking at 3 papers that are maybe 4 to 5 pages, a little bit of research, but kind of easing you into it. I was a homeschooled student, so I hadn't done a ton of research papers really in my high school career. So it was definitely a bit of a learning curve, but practice makes perfect. So it's really one of those things where you will get the hang of it, and kind of writing those different papers. Definitely, I think my sophomore year papers were way better than my freshman year papers. And you'll kind of get the hang of coming up with good topics and ideas, as well as being able to articulate them better. Writing is just so important, and I mean, students sometimes can gripe about it, but I do think like clear writing is clear thinking. That if you can't write in an articulate manner that other people understand and follow an argument logically, then it's usually that you don't actually have that argument clear in your head. So sometimes even just writing it out, even if it's super disorganized, that's okay if that's the first draft. Then you can kind of go back and revise, and you're like, oh yeah, this actually, now that I put it on paper, I said it out loud, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's, I think, writing is just a super important exercise in education, in teaching you to think better and clearer, and articulating those ideas. in terms of kind of what writing a paper looks like, if you haven't really done that much in high school, typically you want to start with brainstorming of just kind of finding your topic. I suggest doing this like 2 to 3 weeks in advance before the paper's even due. That doesn't mean you need to like have your draft ready in 2 days and edit it for 2 weeks. Absolutely not. But you do want to start thinking about, okay, this is what we've been reading the last couple of weeks of class. These are the topics that were really interesting to me. Like that class discussion was super fun, and I would love to argue about whether Aeneas is actually a hero or he's just not a great guy. So finding those topics that are interesting to you, that's going to usually make for a better paper. And you can always kind of talk to the professor about, okay, do you think there's enough here, or is that too big of a topic? And they can kind of help you narrow that down. Then you'll want to, outline something, even if it's just a couple of bullet points of, okay, I think Aeneas is a hero because he takes care of his father, he takes care of his son, and he saves the people of Rome. Like whatever it is, you can kind of, even if it's just those super simple bullet points. And then you can kind of look through the text, that you've been assigned to find maybe some more specific quotes to kind of beef it up a little bit. And then you get to the drafting, and that's the fun part where you're just kind of writing, getting all the ideas out, and trying to argue for your thesis statement and everything. And then after you kind of have that rough draft, it may be, 3 pages long, it may be 2 pages too short, that's okay. Because then you get to the revision stage. And this is where I think the Writing Center is super, super helpful. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Writing Center at Christendom is run by, students who have done really well in their papers. They're very experienced. They're typically upperclassmen. And they will actually read, they'll read your outline, they'll read your rough draft, they'll read your third or second or whatever draft it is, and give you kind of, revisions and advice for polishing up your paper and making it better. So it might be, if you're in the early stages, they can kind of help you, okay, maybe these are some holes in your arguments, and these are some good ways to research or beef that up. But if you're kind of in the final stages, then they can really help you fine tune your phrasing and make sure you're not using the passive voice or different things like that. So the Writing Center is super, super helpful. For any of you who know Bernadette Rodriguez, she was a Writing Center tutor for several semesters at Christendom, and she was just great. I definitely took some of my papers to her, and she was super helpful for kind of giving advice and really making those papers tight. The last thing is formatting. Now, this is a tricky thing, and if you're not familiar with it, in high school, I wasn't at all. Christendom, we will give you something called the Vade Mecum that teaches you how to use Turabian. It's a formatting guide, so it teaches you how to do your footnotes and your research and quotations and how you cite poetry as opposed to prose, all those different fun things. I was definitely still using the Vade Mecum and making sure, okay, does this match up? Am I putting the comma in the right place? All those little things. Formatting can sometimes be annoying, but I do think it's really important for kind of building that academic discipline, to make sure that your ideas are in a clear and concise manner for other people to understand. Like, there's a reason, we have a dress code where it's a little bit formalized, but it's for the sake of us all kind of having that good study environment. So again, similarly, formatting is like the study environment for your paper. You don't want to be writing it in Comic Sans, because that's just a nightmare for your professor to read. Kind of looking from tips from other Christendom students, I was actually just able to ask a freshman and a sophomore earlier this afternoon about kind of what were tips they wished they'd had as freshmen. And some of their top tips were, to review your notes. So right before class, you can review your notes from the previous class. Just again, kind of make sure you know what's going on and you're kind of all keyed up and ready for the professor's lecture. Another one was to go to office hours. So again, if you're ever lost in the class, then it's really helpful to kind of go to the professor and ask for extra help of, hey, I actually really didn't understand what we were talking about when we were talking about Dante's Purgatorio. What's going on with Cato? All those different things. The professors are, I think, required to have at least like 3 to 5 hours a week that they're available to meet with students. And most of them are they're sitting there waiting for students to come by, and they're always so happy to see you. So that was some of my favorite experiences, was just chatting with the professors. We would, start talking about class, and then we would end up talking about, books or movies or just kind of the most recent event on campus, different things like that. As I mentioned, the Writing Center is coming from experienced students who are able to help you with your writing, to, again, just kind of really fine tune those papers and really, really help you in your writing voice. And maybe it's tweaking your formatting or making sure that your grammar is all perfect, so you're not getting any clunky sentences. Sleep. Sleep is also important. Your brain actually works better when it's well rested. So, kind of the bare minimum is to make sure you're getting 6 hours of sleep. I know it's tempting to stay up late, especially freshman year. You have all these new friends and everything. But sleep is really important for making sure you get to your 8:30s on time if you have morning classes. And then also just to make sure your brain is well rested to actually, take your notes and understand them and all of that. And really understanding your readings in the lectures. You don't want to be falling asleep in class because that's time that you're missing out on of really really helpful material sometimes. And the last thing is to give yourself time to really adjust. Again, if you're coming from high school, college is a little bit different, where you're going to have more assignments. You have a lot more of kind of your own time that you have to juggle where you're doing your homework. It isn't just kind of laid out for you. Okay, you're going to do this day and this day. Plus, there's a lot of activities and extracurriculars. And that's one of the really awesome things about college is that there's a ton of things to get involved in, especially at Christendom, like all the clubs and, the events on weekends and everything. But you do kind of have to make sure that, you focus for your academics and give yourself time to figure out what works, whether it's, studying in the mornings and maybe, okay, there's a particular time of afternoon where you focus best, or maybe it's figuring out what kind of planner works best for you. I know I definitely went through a couple of different kinds of planners before I found one that I liked, and finding, okay, these are the kinds of to-do lists I need to make. I need to break down my paper into 80 different steps because otherwise I won't be motivated if I can only cross off one thing. So just kind of finding those strategies, it takes time. I will say my grades got better after freshman year because I started getting the hang of kind of the academics and everything. So it's okay to give yourself some grace and time to adjust. And really, whether it's making sure that you have legible handwriting to actually read your notes, or maybe it's sitting with a friend or going to a specific professor's office hours, finding those kind of experimenting with little things and seeing what works is super helpful for kind of your freshman year and your first semester especially. The last thing is to get your money's worth. You're here to learn at Christendom, and so you really want to make sure that you're investing all that time in your education. It's Christendom college isn't inexpensive, and so that's something where you really want to make sure you're getting the most out of it, and really, learning if your parents are helping you out, and then you especially don't want to waste their money, and make sure that you're really learning so much because if you take full advantage of the academics at Christendom, you will learn and grow so much not just in being smart or nerdy, but really as a person in the way you're able to articulate yourself, the way you're able to have a friendly discussion, not just necessarily like a shouting match or argument, but with people that you disagree with. And honestly, those discussions can lead to some of the best friendships of your life. So I do think there's so much to learn, and so much that you can get out of Christendom. So that being said, I've put my email and phone number at the bottom. If you have any questions, I'm going to pop over to the chat real quick, and see if there's kind of any extra things we want to go over. Okay, awesome. Okay, first question from Isabel Carwin. 3 papers a week or a semester? So in your first semester, it is about 3 papers. And like I said, those are 4 to 5 pages long. And that is for the whole semester. Again, there might be shorter writing assignments, but those are going to be more like 1 to 2 pages. And they won't be as intense with the research or anything like that. So 3 a week. Well, Augustine might have fun with that. If you do come here, you should take Professor Spiata because he loves his writing assignments. He was one of my favorite professors, so you should definitely take him. Oh, thank you, Isabel. Appreciate love of writing. I do love writing. I've loved writing, fiction and poetry and articles. So there's definitely lots of different, opportunities in the academics, and then also in the extracurriculars. We have a really wonderful student magazine on campus, called Metanoia, and so I got to be a writer and an editor for that. And it's just amazing what some of the students come up with, some of the really, really beautiful articles that people are able to contribute, even on top of their schoolwork. So yeah, definitely lots of room for kind of creative, people who want to learn their writing craft more. Are there any assignments that require writing poetry? Great question. So typically for English majors, there is a poetry and poetics course that's required. And for that, I think we had to write 3 poems. I do remember one of my core courses, one of the professors did ask us to write, I think, a sonnet. Or it was, you could either write a sonnet or you could write like 8 lines of a ballad, just kind of depending on which rhythm was easier for you. So there are a couple, it depends on the professor, especially for the core curriculum. But for English majors, you will at least have to do them in poetry and poetics. I'm not super good at poetry, but I will say those were pretty fun, and it was kind of good to step out of my comfort zone a little bit. Awesome. Okay. Any other questions? Right. Going once, going twice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll just go ahead and close with a prayer. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Awesome. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and looking forward to seeing you all here on campus in the fall.